Okay, thank you, Eleanor. So, as Eleanor said, I am metadata and platform architect at DPLA. That means, I suppose, that I both get to have my hands on figuring out what our metadata schemas look like, and then I get to actually build the stuff. So I'm coming to you from that perspective with a little bit of a techie hat on and a little bit of a metadata wonk on hat on, and that's me. Uh, so I want to give you just a little bit of background about what DPLA is in case you don't know. So uh, the Digital Public Library of America is an aggregation system for well, our main project right now, anyway, is an aggregation system for library and archival and museum content from across the United States. So currently, we pull in about 8 million objects from a number of partners nationwide, and we pull that data in from basically whatever the best service that they have to offer it looks like. So we have a wide variety of different kinds of data sources. We have a wide variety of different kinds of data inputs. And what we do is we take that data and we bend it into our metadata application profile, and we provide enhancement services over the top of it, and then we put it out there for people to use. All the data is licensed CC0, so the goal is to have really open content across the cultural heritage sector for the United States. Think of like if you know what Europeana does in Europe, DPLA is shooting for very similar goals here in the United States on a national scale. So the model that we have to pull data in is through service hubs and content hubs. So the content hubs are generally pretty big institutions with fairly large amounts of data and fairly high in terms of their capacity to work with us on a technical basis. So these institutions we work with on a one-to-one basis. Sometimes they have specific like APIs that they're going to offer their data to us over, and we will work with them to implement the best way for us to aggregate their content. Service hubs are a little bit different in that they serve as regional or statewide or otherwise some kind of grouping of cultural heritage institutions coming together to provide consortia-like services to serve as a middleman kind of aggregator. So what this does, let's switch to that slide first. So what this does is it reduces the number of individual relationships that we have to have and gives us a conduit in terms of a middle organization that we can use to reach smaller cultural heritage institutions, smaller historical societies, content that lives in institutions that wouldn't have the capacity to work with us on IPM. We can work with them through the content hubs to bring data up on a regional basis, and it increases our bandwidth to be able to pull in new data, and it gives us more opportunities to reach smaller institutions. So we provide a number of services with this data. We have faceted search, the typical kind of stuff. There's a map that shows where all the content comes from. So when we design our metadata application profile, we're trying to serve these these various uh, these various use cases, and then we're also trying to figure out the best way to represent the content that the partners are giving us. So we don't want to be throwing out a lot of data when we do this transformation. And then we also want to find ways that we can get value added. So that's one of the places where linked data comes in. And again, all this data is open, so it comes over, oh, excuse me, it comes over an API, and it's published as JSON LD. When I switch over to off the slides and onto the actual metadata application profile, I will tell you a little bit more about the details of how our system handles the JSON LD. And we provide bulk downloads for the complete repository and the individual partners. Okay, I'm going to go off slide deck now and talk to you a little bit more directly about what it is that we actually work with. Okay, so we have currently we're currently running on a version of our application profile that that internally is called version 3.1. So our approach, first of all, is not to have a specific DPLA ontology. So we don't have an internal, like, all-encompassing monolithic ontology. We have a Dublin Core application profile. And that gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we iterate over our data model. So we're on 3.1 now. We're pushing to 4.0. So I'm going to talk to you about 4.0. So this is the basic overall domain model for 4.0. The highlighted blue classes are the core classes. So we have source resources, which represent the main objects, the cultural heritage objects that we aggregate. ORE aggregations are kind of a wrapper that lets us group those with the various web resources that they're associated with. So that a web resource would be a thing like a thumbnail or the partner's page view for it. So links that we might send people to are web resources. And then we have these contextual classes, agents and collections and time spans and places, and then concepts more broadly that we use to create a more complicated data structure that lets us have richer data. So some of the challenges that we face in particular are that we can't really put our finger down necessarily on what we are going to get from any given partner. So one of the goals of the application profile then is to make sure that when we get data from the partner, that there's a limited core that we actually can rely on being able to build out from that, or that we could say to the partner, you really need to work with us to get that, and then be able to build upon that. So so that's where some of the contextual classes are coming from. The strategy that we use for building out the complex data here is basically, so you see the SCOS concept class here is kind of the core that we use to link out. So if, say, we get a textual creator label for somebody for some particular object, and we might get a large number of textual creator labels that are more or less the same. So one of the things that we're able to do with the linked data aspect of our data model is pop into, and we can do some external matching to try and find exact matches where we have a high degree of confidence, or close matches where we have a lower degree of confidence, but we think there's value added in being able to link to an external data source, and then try and bring those closely related creator labels together underneath this broader agent model, so we can link them together and facet against them and do other kinds of work based on the assumption that they're closely related. So there are a couple of additional things that I just want to point out here. So one of the things that we have added in the newest version of the application profile is this facility to use open annotation. So we've basically included this as an extension. The idea here is that this gives us a way to, well, first of all, for us internally to add data that doesn't rise to the level of actual full-on high confidence kind of metadata, but that is a useful annotation for some particular use case. So one example might be that we could have annotations that say this fits into a particular this object fits into a particular genre, and we can provide genre view kind of pages based on those annotations. And then it also gives us hooks to let partners do that kind of work, and have us be able to build tools that interact with the partners' external data. So that's an example, I guess, of where we're not terribly centralized, or hope to not be terribly centralized, is being able to pull in external link data in the form of things like annotations and use it against our particular resources. So I guess pulling into your question, Eleanor, about how we work in terms of a backbone, with the question about federated versus aggregation. I would say that we are fairly firmly an aggregator in the sense that all of our data is pulled in directly to our system, but then it goes through a pretty high degree of transformation to get it into the DPLA map format. The bulk of the work that we do on the technical side right now is in this aggregation and mapping and enhancement process. So the process sort of begins like we're going to specify a harvester, and the harvester is going to pull in data in an original format, and then a lot of magic happens on our end to to map that data, whatever format it came in from, to our specific metadata application profile. And at that point, we try to provide value-added services based on what we were able to extract from that data. I think at this point, what I'd like to do is just open things up for like a general discussion. I think that was definitely the impression that I had was that this is this kind of forum is where we would like to be able to chat with each other. So I'm here. Also with me, my colleague Gretchen Jijin joined us today, and she might chime in at some point to talk to us about what's happening on the content team side if there are questions that are relevant to that.
Tom, I have a question. This is Eleanor.
Sure thing.
And this is hypothetical because any decisions would need to be discussed with the members of the American Art Collaborative. But just as a hypothetical, let's say we wanted to share our data with you, okay, hypothetically, if that's what AAC decided to do. And we're planning in our implementation phase to publish our data if we move forward as linked open data. Could you take that? Because what you just described in terms of harvesting data in its original format and then going through your transformation process that maps and enhances and does certain things, could you take our data as linked open data, or would you really want our data as XML or TMS or whatever? I'm just trying to clarify your process of working with people who are providers.
So one of the things that happens on the Service Hub side frequently is that they will do intermediary transformation. So a good example would be Mountain West Digital Library has their own application profile that's closely aligned with ours, but because they don't have the capacity to work with it as linked data on their end, they have an application profile that's not prescriptive about using RDF, and then we reharvest that, and we work with them to make sure that process, that kind of incremental process where there's an intermediary transformation happening, gets us the quality data that we need, and then they can provide services based on their own intermediary aggregation. Another example where there's this kind of intermediary transformation going on is what California Digital Library is talking about doing, which is actually using the DPLA map up front, and then we would harvest directly from them in map format, and probably do very little in terms of transformation. There's some of our enhancement processes may run where we do things like geocoding for place names to power the map. But I guess going more specifically to your question, like supposing that the AAC were wanting to provide data to DPLA, and you had linked data published over common linked data publishing practices, we would harvest from that. So a harvester in this sense isn't like an OAI PMH harvester per se. It's kind of a more abstract idea about being able to specify where we get this data. So in the case of somebody who's already providing us linked data, we would pull down their link data, uh, and then, at least for current practice, what we would do is transform it into DPLA map. Uh, Depending on what the nature of that link data is, and I think this is something that we'll explore more as practice in the cultural heritage community grows, uh, is we might be able to do something like do the transformation on our end to DPLA map, but also link very specifically to their external data and use that external link data in our services. So one of the things that we're working on right now is that all of this link data exists in the current formats, but our internal systems aren't terribly aware of it. They work with data as JSON, and then it's published as JSON LD, and we don't have a stack at this point that's super aware of the fact that we're working with RDF. And that's something that we're in the process of fixing right now. And then the platforms that we're working with would provide us things like link data caching, where we could do stuff like if AAC has data and we're harvesting into DPLA map format, then we could link back and have the AAC stuff projected in our link data cache, and our application would have access to that, or all of our applications would have access to that over link data protocols, but we would still have our internal map that we publish over the API, if that makes sense. So I think there's a little bit of balance here between for us between doing link data in a big way and providing a straightforward JSON API that actually is easy to work with for developers who are building on the DPLA platform.
Okay, checking if any. I have another question, but who else has a question? Diane. Okay, Diane. Should I just ask it?
Yeah.
Tom, can you talk a little bit more about how the interface works?
Sure. Why don't I pull up some interfacey bits? Hang on. Let me. So, I mean, you can get to this via dp.la. So we have a couple of things that we provide. So I'm going to do my usual stock search. So we have this basic kind of faceted search that provides access to the whole 8 million objects, and a large number of them at this point are images, but there's some good variety in terms of what's accessible. You can see a little bit, depending on the quality of data that we've gotten from the partner, you'll either see a large amount or a relatively small amount of data here. The links tend to go back to the actual partner's version of the object. So you can see that these got pulled in. These two images are pulled in as separate images in DPLA. You have Charles Darwin cigarette package, and you can facet against contributing institution and format and do date kinds of work. So we do a lot of work normalizing the dates. So let's say and see what we get. I'm not sure if that search will Yeah. Uh, they're typically URLs out. Uh, another thing that we spend a lot of effort dealing with are these write statements. So we're in the process of rolling out practices for normalized write statements, so that we have a better way of building services around what you, as the searcher on DPLA, when you discover this item, what you can actually do with it. The date normalization work powers this timeline, so you have the ability to browse through references or matches from a variety of times. And then let me pop back. Then we have a couple of other kinds of interfaces. We have exhibitions and the map, so we can this is geocoding normalization that we do on partner data to place items in specific places. We're getting incrementally more sophisticated about how to do this, and doing work now on figuring out how we want to model polygons on our side, geographic polygons, so we can do more sophisticated things with, like, what do you, if you're looking for items that are in a particular city, we would have a bounding box for the city and that kind of stuff. And then we've got the bookshelf, which is a neat little browse functionality. Yeah, and again, you can kind of facet across. And I'm seeing the question. I'm seeing a couple of questions. Any interface functionality in the dev specifically for visual materials? I suppose that probably means something like IIIF, zoom and pan kind of viewers. And I would say no, that's not in dev. Mostly because at this point we're a metadata aggregator as opposed to a content aggregator, so we don't host any actual files on our end. With specific projects going forward, that may or may not change, and we're involved in some of the communities surrounding what's happening with, like, IIIF, for instance. So we're keeping our finger on that pulse, but we don't have any actual plans to move forward with anything like that in particular. And then also I see the question about elaborating on ontologies, and yeah, I'm just going to pop back to the actual. Oh, I don't want to double click to edit. going to pop back to the actual map because you can see. So there's, yeah. So again, the plan, the basic philosophy of the map is not to have a unified ontology. We do have a namespace for terms that we pull in or that we minted ourselves. So source resource, for instance, is our core object is in the DPLA namespace. And then we use substantially DC terms. That's really the basic core of our application profile, and we're closely aligned throughout with Europeana data model. And then you'll see some other things get pulled in here. There's ORE aggregation is also a core class. There's some terminology from SCOS. And again, SCOS provides us with our basic strategy for managing the relative uncertainties that we have about linking to external content or external concepts. So if we want to try and connect a subject heading that we pulled in from partner data to something in iid.loc.gov, for instance, SCOS gives us the hooks to do that without necessarily saying same as or without necessarily destroying the partner's original textual data, which it's important to us that people working with the API and people experiencing items on our platform get a good reflection of what the partners are providing us, while also leaving space for us to do enhancement work to improve the experience overall. So yeah, you can see the actual full list here in front of you. There's a couple of different geographic approaches, and that may actually expand because we're currently in discussions with some people in the geographic data community about what the best way for us to approach modeling geographic spaces, so that those namespaces may expand before this actually gets released. For the question about finding aids, maybe that's a point where we could unmute Gretchen and see what's cooking on the content team side. I don't know of any finding aid plans.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so hi everybody, this is Gretchen Gigan. We actually just had a meeting last week related to finding aids. We do not have any firm standing plans to integrate finding aids, so let me just say that first. And it's not that we don't like finding aids, it's just that they don't necessarily fit with the data model that we have. So we have a repository that is entirely item-based with detailed item-level metadata. And so we firmly believe that throwing in collection-level objects next to the item-level metadata is not going to be a really great search experience. We also have the issue of having a collecting mandate that the material is digital and online. And while there certainly are fully digitized collections, American Archives of Art is an example, a lot of collections are not fully digitized. So all of that said, we have been having some conversations with the SAA's roundtable on EAD and the EAD3 group, and we have talked about the potential of partnering with them on some sort of pilot projects, but nothing is at all firm yet. So I don't want to give any mistaken sort of ideas. But the EAD group, we had two different sorts of ideas of how we might work. And the first and probably most interesting would be to work on a kind of intermediary interface that would use the EAD content as a kind of a portal to a particular collection and then pull in item level objects from DPLA. So that'd be one way to sort of integrate with EAD rather than us aggregating EAD. And the other option was with EAD3 to potentially use EAD as an actual harvest format. So instead of publishing an OAI XML, we could harvest from a published EAD container list. And that's just a theoretical idea at this point, that there are a lot of kind of practical things from our end that would not really support that. The biggest one being that right now we ask our content aggregators to provide at least 200,000 objects. That's our content aggregators. So those are people who are a single institution that just provide us with records, as opposed to an aggregator, what we call a service hub, who works with a bunch of different partners to pull all of their data together in a kind of consortium model. So it would have to be a whole lot of objects in EAD before we would want to go down the path of figuring out how to work with it. But EAD is one of several things that are kind of, as Tom mentioned with the image interface, one of several things that are kind of on our radar, but we don't have firm plans to work with, but we're open to participating with people. And I see now there's a question about SNAC. We've not talked with SNAC at all. And I think the nice thing about what we're doing and what they're doing is that when we have our data, because we make it available through an API, there would be nothing to stop a participation between SNAC and DPLA. SNAC could certainly grab our data and align it with their authority records. We haven't talked with them about that, but it's definitely an idea of something out there that could definitely be possible. So please let me know if you have any other questions about EAD or if anything wasn't clear. But I would say, along with like ebooks and image viewers and full text newspaper content, it's something we're very aware that there's a need for and something that is on it's in our view. It's something that we're keeping an eye on, but it's not something that we have some fundamental things to work on first, like getting representation in all 50 states, for example. And so maybe in the future there'll be more opportunities for kind of fun collaborations like that. So thanks.
Whoops. This is Eleanor. One of you perhaps could answer the following. On your website, you show partnerships or that you've received data from Art Store or Smithsonian, but can you talk a little bit more about other museum data you may be already incorporating, for example, museums at universities, whatever it may be?
Gretchen, I think you're more familiar with the details of the various content and service hubs actual content than I am.
Right. I was just actually opening up my browser window. So Tom and I both started with DPLA in August. So we don't have a huge amount of experience with who's been a part of the collection over the years. Give me 1 second here, and let me see if I can get a sense of any other museums. Art Store and Smithsonian have both donated directly as content hubs. So with them, it's really just the material in their collections. It looks like we've also worked with the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. I know we've worked with some very small historical societies. So, Missouri History Museum, Public Health Museum in Massachusetts, and and things like the streetcar museum in Minnesota or some small places like that. But I would think that those small museums tend to be coming in through our service hubs, so they're part of a statewide consortium of some sort. Um, we haven't done a lot of really large-scale museum cooperative relationships yet, and that is not necessarily a meaningful oversight. It's just that we have been concentrating on trying to get service hubs up in states, and we have not really pursued a lot of content hubs. So remembering again the difference between those two, because we want to spend a lot of our infrastructure, the staff time that we have, on helping to form those consortiums in those states. Now, that's not to say that the consortium has to be state-based. It could certainly be. We certainly have a regional one, and there are other ways to go about that. But but that's why we haven't. That's like diversifying our partner type of institution has been something that we've been lucky has been pretty diverse, and we have some charts of that sort of thing. But at this point, our number one priority isn't trying to diversify that. It probably will be at some point, though, in the future. I just noticed here we also have a lot of National Air and Space Museum, National Museum of American History, which I recognize are all part of the Smithsonian, but we do have multiple Smithsonian museums and institutes as part of our collection. Natural History Museum and the Natural and I'm also seeing the Natural History Museum, Library of London. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
So if you're looking at what's on the screen share, this is the contributing institution facet, and you can, you can browse through this on any given search, or what I've done is I've searched against nothing, and that returns everything. And so you can kind of see a snapshot of the individual institutions. The contributing institution is narrower than the partner. So sometimes these are like, you'll see map division of the New York Public Library here as opposed to just NYPL, and you can get a pretty good picture of like where the collections are all coming from to date.
And what I actually just did was search on the word museum and then looked at the contributing institution, which may not be a perfect search, but may narrow it down so that within my first page of results, it was about 80% museums. So like I said, a lot of small museums involved.
Before we end, unless others have a question, what would you like to see DPLA look like, let's say 10 years from now?
Sure. So I think there's a lot to say about that, and there's a lot of perspectives out there in the public about what DPLA can and should be. We're certainly interested in pushing forward with more diverse kinds of content, and not just in terms of what we're getting from cultural heritage institutions in the special collections and archives and museums kind of perspective, but also thinking about what other kinds of public digital content exist, public domain ebooks, those kinds of things. So I think I would like to see DPLA expand so that there's a greater diversity in terms of what content we have, and much more, I think, gradually more sophisticated in terms of what we can do with our metadata from the partners. And one way that happens is by our work with with the metadata and the lessons that we learn in trying to map it into a common format, being communicated back to the partners, and the kinds of enhancements that we run being pushed back to the partners as data quality improvements that they can count on. The more that we can do in terms of improving the data quality and expanding the scope of the collections, the more that we can do in terms of actually seeing powerful and compelling interfaces for people to access this kind of material. And then, of course, I think it's really important to say that I think everybody at DPLA and everybody associated with DPLA is very committed to the idea that we're going to be working with open content. So continually dealing with situations where, like, the interfaces that we're building are really about public access for cultural heritage, and not necessarily about just pulling in stuff that people can't actually get to. It's really important to us that the work that we do mean that the public can really get at this content in a way that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming up on the screen, but just in case somebody there has one, now would be the time. Otherwise, Tom, Gretchen, we thank you very much. We really appreciated getting to understand DPLA better. Thank you.